Hello everyone, this is Genius Yoshi, and today we're going to be reviewing the Sapphire cards from Rise of Floodborn Lorcana, the second chapter. Oh, I didn't say that. So let's move on to the rating scale. 5-star rating. I actively want to play this card. It's going to be amazing. 4-star rating. Yeah, I'm going to be playing it for sure, including it in a lot of decks, or some decks, but I'm not going to be ashamed of it. 3-star rating. I'm going to be a little ashamed of it. 2-star rating. I'm going to be very ashamed of it, and you probably shouldn't be playing those cards. And 1-star rating, well, let's just forget that they exist and move on with our lives, starting this review. To kick things off, we have Alice, the Growing Girl, an inkable 3-drop with 1/4 stats, quest for 1. So the 4 willpower is welcome. 1 power is not that great, but let's look at her abilities. All your other characters gain support. Okay, that's nice. You can do some shenanigans with that, and suddenly that 1 power doesn't seem like much of a liability, and the 4 willpower makes her decent already. And what did I do? Her second ability. When she has 10 power or more, suddenly she quests for 5. Okay, this is a bit an ability kind of like what Belle has. Belle's strange but special. They're both solid cards just for their stats. Well, slightly subpar stats, but with a good first ability. And the second ability allows you to win games in the late game. And if you have enough characters on the battlefield with support, then you can quest with your other characters, gaining a bunch of lore, and pump Alice off of the support so that Alice can suddenly quest for 5. And if you've been questing for a bunch of characters and Alice quests for 5, that's a lot of lore in one turn. And you can have multiple Alices. So if you have 2 Alices and you can pump them enough, then maybe you can quest for 10 just off of the Alice's Growing Girls. That seems very good. Also, just suddenly you play Alice and your board situation has completely changed because all of your characters suddenly gain support. So that Mickey Mouse detective can suddenly get supported by one of your other characters, and you get a big combat and lose a very weak character out of nowhere, and the opponent gets surprised, and you still have a nice threat sitting on the battlefield. I really like Alice Growing Girl. I think she's a fantastic card, and I'm going to give her a 4-star rating because I don't think she's completely groundbreaking, but she is a very good card and deserves inclusion in a lot of decks. Here we have Basil, the Great Mouse Detective, a 3/4 for 6 inkable, quest for 3. That's a lot of lore points. Shift 5, and if you use Shift to play this character, you may draw 2 cards when he enters play. Drawing 2 cards is certainly good, but his stats line is weak. So the 3/4 stats is weak. The questing for 3 is actually pretty good. But without having some combative stats of 4/5 at least, or something a bit better, he's going to be hard pressed to stay alive, especially as a 6-drop. And as a 6-drop, he's not worth it. You really want to shift him. Now, the 2 other Basils that are in the set aren't great. So you have to play a weak shifting target, and then you shift him on 5. So it's costed you 2 cards, and at least 8 ink to get a 3/4 that quests for 3. Now you won't get much of in terms of element of surprise because he doesn't have much combat. I mean, you can quest for a lot, I guess. That's alright. But you're paying 2 overpriced cards with weak stats to replace them. I'd rather play the 3-drop Maleficent that gives you the 2/2 and only costs you 3, so it's a smaller investment. There's also, I think, the Goat Merlin that draws you card when it enters the battlefield. When it leaves the battlefield, that's a much cheaper investment, and you're getting more stats for your ink. So overall, the Great Mouse Detective, not that great. So I'm going to give him a 2-star rating. It's still drawing 2 cards, and if there are stronger, useful Basils in the future, then the Great Mouse Detective is going to go up in value. But for now, the not so great Mouse Detective. Here we have Basil of Baker Street, 2/2 for 2 inkable, quest for 1 with support. These are the stats of a 1-drop with a very weak ability. So overall, I do not recommend playing this Basil. He is a very basic Basil and not worth the shift target. I'll give him the 1-star rating. Here we have another vanilla Basil, the Perceptive Investigator. 3/4/4 inkable, quest for 2. 3/4 is the stats line for an inkable 3-drop. 3/3 quest for 2 is the stats line of an inkable 3-drop. Getting the extra willpower or the extra lore for the 4 cost really isn't worth it. You need to have an ability to be viable as a 4-drop at this point in time. So this card also gets a 1-star rating as being vanilla garbage. Next up we have Caterpillar, Calm and Collected. 1/3/3 inkable, quests for a whopping 3. So he's a big quester, and he's relatively cheap with decent toughness for the amount you're paying for him. Now the one thing that I should mention is that the difference between questing for 1 and questing for 2 is you're doubling the speed at which you're accumulating lore. And when you're questing for 2 to 3, then you're just increasing it by 50%. So it's not as big of a deal to quest for 3. But with a 3 willpower, he can live through some combat if your opponent's just playing effect type characters that have 2 power. Maybe Caterpillar is somewhat difficult to remove, and if you have ways to protect him, he's gonna end up winning the game pretty fast for you. But overall, he's just a vanilla character, and I'm going to give him a 2-star rating. If he had the 4 point of willpower, then maybe he'd go up to 3-star, but as a 1/3, he's not quite good enough. Here we have Cogsworth, Grandfather Clock. 2/5/5 with ward, shift 3, quests for 2. So that's fairly decent stats line. It's similar to Jasmine and with ward. So ward is actually pretty strong here. And his ability I really like. All of your other character gains resist 1. So you're kind of playing Cogsworth as an enchantment or some kind of passive ability that you just let Cogsworth stand there in the corner, lying on his cane for support, and he just protects all your characters with resist 1. And resist is pretty good, especially since it stacks. If you have some Mickey Mouse armors or extra Cogsworths, then you can start adding up the resist. That gives you, well, with Cogsworths with resist is actually very difficult to remove, short of a be prepared. Tinkerbell, well, Tinkerbell will ping him because he doesn't have resist himself, but your characters are going to get resistant to Tinkerbell's abilities. You're going to be resistant to grab your sword. Resist is actually very good, especially when it's board wide on your side of the battlefield with a mostly untouchable Cogsworth's Grandfather Clock. And if you need to, you can quest with him, you can fight with him. He's quite decent at that. So I'm going to give this card a 4-star rating. I think that this is going to get included in a lot of decks and is a very solid inclusion. Here we have Cogsworth, the Talking Clock. 2/3/2, inkable, characters with reckless gain, exert to gain 1 lore, any quest for 1. So he basically allows your reckless character to activate this ability instead of being forced into combat and to gain 1 lore, which is alright. Prevents reckless of the recklessness and gives them a way to quest. So double up. 2/3 is the stats. 2/3 quest for 1 is typically the stats of vanilla 2-drops. So it's a vanilla 2-drop with benefits, which I kind of like. The effect's not fantastic. It's okay. And he's a shift target for the Grandfather Clock, which I do really like. So overall, I think Cogsworth, the Talking Clock, is going to see some play. I want to give him 3.5. I'm going to give him 3 stars, mostly because he's not that flashy. He can be cut, but I wouldn't mind including him in some decks that play the Grandfather Clock. Nice shift target. Again, vanilla with benefits. Here we have Corella DeVille, a fashionable cruiser, 3/2/2, inkable, and quest for only 1. So stats line is on par for vanilla 2-drop, but she has the ability that she can challenge characters with evasive during your turn. If we're playing best of 3, Corella DeVille is quite a good sideboard card if you're afraid of evasive decks. In particular, some of the best evasive with the new Ruby Minnie Mouse and Pongo have 3 toughness, willpower. So Corella is a cheap alternative, or a cheap option that allows you to take them down by combat. And that is quite valuable as a nice sideboard option. So I'm going to give her a 3-star rating as nice sideboard option, but kind of plain otherwise. Here we have Corella DeVille, Perfectly Wretched. 4-3 for 5 with an outstanding coat, quests for 2, shift 3. And her ability is whenever she quests, chosen opposing character loses 2 power. Okay. Well, the -2 power type effects haven't been overly good. We've seen the 3-drop Maximus in Amber in the first chapter that has that as an enter the battlefield ability with very similar stats. And having this as an enter the battlefield ability is arguably better than having to activate it whenever you quest, because you can get the opponent with the element of surprise, as Corella DeVille can still do that, but she has to shift, which means you need a cheaper Corella to put her on, and then as she quests, well, she can't combat. So it's quite an investment for a weak ability. Her stats line's not that great. I do like that she's inkable, but compared to the Amber Queen that has a -4 and a +4 whenever she quests, better shift, better stats essentially, Corella DeVille falls very short, and I don't think she's going to see any play, so I'm going to give her a 1-star rating. Sorry, Corella, you'll need a better coat. Next up we have Duke Weaselton, the small-time crook. He's a 1-2 for 2, inkable, quest for 2 with ward. Okay, so he's similar to the Amber LeFou that we had with upsides, with the upside being ward. Now ward is very good ability because it makes Duke of Weaselton very difficult to stop him from having at least 1 quest. You need something that allows you to challenge a ready character or some kind of board wipe like grab your swords. Outside of that, Duke Weaselton's almost guaranteed a quest. And honestly, any 2-drop that can quest for 2 can be played. It's actually decent if you're playing an aggressive curve. And if you can defend Duke of Weaselton with a bodyguard and he gets to quest a couple of times, well, that's great. And if you draw him late game and he forces his 2 questing because the opponent's standing with your Ruby Amethyst opponent has a big dragon Maleficent and an Elsa in hand and they can't deal with your Duke Weaselton, well, suddenly Duke Weaselton just upgraded his status from a small-time crook to a big-time quester. And because of that, I think that's actually a very playable card. And I'm going to give him a 4-star rating. Feel free to flame me in the comments below for that star rating. So pause the video, do that immediately, and let me know for those who are on my side and think Duke Weaselton is actually trying to pull a fast one on us and is actually very good. Let me know in the comments below as well. Here we have Gaston, Intellectual Powerhouse, 4-4 for 6, quests for 3. That's a lot of lore. 4-4, slightly underwhelming stats for a 6-drop, but still okay. He shifts 4, so you can play him on top of other Gastons, which is pretty nice. And when you play this character, look at the top 3 cards of your deck, and you put 1 to your hand and the rest on the bottom. So whenever you play him, he replaces himself with a card of your choice from the top of your deck. It's pretty nice digging ability, nice effect, decent stats. The only problem is he's not inkable, and he's a 6-drop, which is kind of costly. He's competing with, I mean, Hades is pretty close at 7, and there's a lot of nice inkable 5 and 6 drops in Sapphire. Now Sapphire is the color of ramp, and maybe he's an inclusion in a couple of copies in a Ruby Sapphire deck where you're playing the cheap Gaston for the early game pressure, and suddenly you just play the Intellectual Powerhouse to prevent him from being reckless, draw some cards, and then you have a potential threat on the battlefield. So I think he's going to see some play with a couple of copies. I give him a 3-star rating, kind of on the fence, Not an auto inclusion, but might see some play. Here we have Grandpappy, oldest and wisest, a non-inkable 7-drop. Ugh. 3/6, quest for 3. Serviceable stats line. With the ability, whenever you remove 1 or more damage from one of your characters, gain 2 lore. Okay, we have an ability here. So that ability can allow you to gain very large amounts of lore in one turn. In particular in Sapphire, so you have access to Healing Queen Jasmine, Queen of Agrabah, which whenever she enters the battlefield, just boom, 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 heals a bunch of your characters, and if you remove damage from your characters, you gain 2 lore. You can gain a lot of lore with this. Rapunzel, Queen of Healing, draws you cards, already a nice inclusion. You can also play with, I think there's Dingle Hopper, Coconut Basket, actually just Grandpappy with Coconut Basket. Play it, heal a character for 2, gain 2 lore. Just like that. So there's a nice combo healing style deck that you can brew with Grandpappy, which is going to be super fun, very combo-ish. Actually, look forward to seeing a Grandpappy deck on my channel. I don't think it's going to be competitive, but it's certainly going to be fun, and it's going to be good enough to be played at your local game store and not get completely destroyed. But 7 non-inkable, this is a good ability, but it's a build around a very bulky card, and unless there's a lot more synergy around healing, I don't think it's going to be that great. But because the ability is so cool and powerful, I'm still going to give him a 4-star rating, maybe a little closer to 3. But I mean, look at him with the energy balls, Rasengan thingies. He's wise. Better trust the wiseness and rank him 4-star. Here we have Hiram Sham, a 1/6 for 4. Inkable, quests for 1, and when you play this character, and whenever he quests, you may banish one of your items to draw 2 cards. Now, that's an ability. So, which items are we banishing? Well, I'm thinking Popsicle, Magic Golden Flowers, all of these 1-drop items, you can suddenly trade them in for 2 cards. And why is that super great? Well, we already have item support. We have Tamatoa, we have Maurice, we have Ariel, and now we have Hiram Sham that allows us to use these items that are in play, even though they're useless to begin with. And we've also gained a few more items with Rise of Floodborn, making the items tribal archetype stronger than it was before. I don't think that it's quite top tier competitive, but we can definitely make some viable good stuff with that deck. And Hiram Sham is most certainly going to be part of that deck. The 6 willpower makes him very tough to remove, and 1 power is a bit lackluster, but I mean, he has a great ability, and it's enter the battlefield, which is very important, and whenever he quests, so you can double down on the card draw power of Sham. And I'm going to give this card a 4-star rating. Very good card in that very specific archetype. Next we have James, role model, 3/3 for 4, non-inkable, quest for 2, and whenever he's banished, for whatever reason, you may put it in the inkwell face down and exerted. So, I really like this card. I don't like the fact that it's not inkable, so you're committing to playing James, the role model, every time you draw him. And 3/3 quest for 2 is actually decent stats for a 4-drop. I mean, how much better does it get? Maybe you get a 3/4 as a vanilla character, and the ability is pretty good. It means that you can get a good combat with James and deal 3 points of damage, non-negligible, and you turn him into ink. We've seen just how powerful Grammatella is with that ability as a 2-drop with no stats whatsoever. Well, James has the 2 quest and the 3 power and some level of toughness, and he still has that ability. Yes, it's later in the game, but there's a lot of good 6, 7, 8 type drops in the game right now, and games tend to reach that point. So James allows you to reach that point just a little bit faster while still providing a board presence on turn 4. So now you have the Grammatella Mickey James type of line that gives you some kind of board presence as well as very nice consistent ramping. The only problem is the lack of inkability on these cards, which is a bit of a problem. And James costing more than the other two cards, Grammatella and Mickey Mouse, is a bit of a problem because you typically want the ramp to come in early, but it's still a good playable card. I'm going to give it a 3-star rating, mostly because one jump ahead, Grammatella and Mickey exist, and James comes in later, and you don't necessarily want to ramp that much later, and he's not inkable. That's the main reason. So 3-star rating for James, but don't be afraid to include him in some decks. He's definitely going to amp up your ink pool. Next up, we have Jasmine, Hair of Agrabah. 1/2 for 1, inkable, quest for 1, and when you play this character, remove up to 1 damage from chosen character of yours. By herself, not a great card. I mean, the stats, subpar for a 1-drop. And her ability, well, if you can make the healing 1 help you to save a character this turn, then it's been worth quite a bit. What I do like about this card, well, there's 2 things. 1, she plays well with the healing tribal deck because she's a very cheap way to trigger healing procs. So for that deck, she's very good. The other reason why I like Jasmine Hair of Agrabah is because of Jasmine Queen of Agrabah, which can shift very cheaply on top of an unsuspecting Hair of Agrabah, which actually makes sense. The hair becomes the queen. Seems logical. And suddenly you can mass heal all your characters. So you have this little cheap healing spell, a little bit of board presence, and she threatens to be shifted on. So she's a very nice shifting target. So I'm going to give her a 3-star rating as mostly as a shifting target with some upsides in the healing tribe. Next up, we have Judy Hops, the Optimistic Officer, as a 2/3 for 3, inkable, quest for 2, and when you play her, you may banish an item and its player draws a card. So, she's some level of redundancy for Flavers, except Flavers does draw you to 2 cards. It's only an enter the battlefield ability, but it's flexible because you can use her as removal for the opponent's items, or you can sacrifice your own items to draw a card. And in an items tribal deck, you probably want to play some copies of Judy Hops just to cycle these cards and have redundancy for Flavers, as well as a potential tool to remove some of the opponent's items, unless you have access to the steel versions that just destroy the items for free from the opponent. Judy Hops is an acceptable alternative to take out some of these pesky items. Say your opponent is sitting with mouse armor, magic mirror, or something more troublesome. They've invested a lot of ink into some of these big items, then Judy Hops is a fine answer in the Sapphire ink. Flexible, but not overly great at a specific thing. Her stats are okay. Actually, 42 drop, 2/3, quest for 2 on 3. She has one of the better abilities. But still, I'm going to give her a 3-star rating as a nice utility card. Maybe you play her as a 1 or 2 of in your deck, just because item removal is pretty useful, even though you're giving back a card to the opponent. Next up is Mrs. Judson, a 1/5 for 4 non-inkable, quest for 2, and whenever you play a Floodborn character, you may put the top card of your deck into your inkwell face down and exert it. Well, we have a lot of these abilities in Sapphire, and at some point, only the best ones are going to see play. We have Grammatella, we have Mickey Mouse, and we have one jump ahead, and typically you want your lower costed card to bring in that extra ink. Now, Mrs. Judson doesn't even do it on turn 4. You need to play something else on top of it, a Floodborn character. And unfortunately, Floodborn characters are quite expensive. So, assume you're playing Miss Judson on 4, then you can play on 5 your first Floodborn character, and you trigger the ability once. Alright, it's all good. And now you get that extra ink, maybe to reach a Hades a little earlier, or something like that. It's okay, but she can't defend herself very well with just 1 power as a 4-drop. and you do need that Floodborn character. Otherwise, Miss Judson just is a sitting duck, really? And I don't like that she's not inkable. That's probably my biggest problem with this card. Because otherwise you could just ink her. And if you don't have a Floodborn character, simple solution, get some extra ink without having to trigger her ability. So overall, I think she's going to go as a 2-star character, simply because there are better options out there. Next up, we have Nick Wilde, a 2/4 Wily Fox for 4, quests for 2, and is inkable. And when you play this character, you may return a Popsicle from your discard pile to your hand. And Popsicle is a cheap item that allows you to draw a card, and that can self-sacrifice. So it's a little bit like the Captain Hook with the Fire the Cannon type of situation, where if you get them together, they're actually pretty good. If you don't, well, you're in a bit of a bad position. So Nick Wilde feels like a nice inclusion in a couple of copies in an item deck that plays a full playset of Popsicles, mostly because if you can pick back up that Popsicle and start your item's trigger, you're in a good position. And if you don't, well, Nick Wilde's inkable, so what do you have to lose? Also, in terms of stats, if you do get to recover the Popsicle, the 2/4 should help him to stay alive for at least 1 or 2 combats, and questing for 2 is decent. Stats line, yeah, just a little subpar, but when you're getting +1 and an item trigger out of it, you're doing a pretty good thing. And that's kind of what items synergies is looking for. So I'm going to give Nick Wilde a 3-star rating, mostly because Popsicle is just really good, and it's mostly in the items tribal type of deck that I see this fox little guy doing some work. Here we have Noy, the Orphan Thief, 1/2 for 2, inkable, quests for 2. So he's one of these few 2-drops that quest for 2. Very aggressive, very fast, and generally speaking, quite decent. And his ability is whenever you have an item in play, he gains resist 1 and a ward. 2 very strong keywords. The resist essentially puts him in a better spot than a 1/3 for 2 that quests for 2, which is very solid on its own. And ward almost guarantees his ability to quest. That's very solid. And all you need to do is have enough items in play to keep Noy happy. So maybe you're playing Popsicles, Mouse Armors, and that's probably enough to play Noy. Stick a bodyguard in front of him, and you have that ward-resistant character with a bodyguard, and you're in pretty good business. So I really like the Orphan Thief. I think he deserves to see play in an aggressive Sapphire deck, and I'm going to give him a 4-star rating. Next up, we have Owl, Logical Lecturer, a 2/2 for 1, quest for 1, vanilla character. These are essentially trash at this point, unless they're a good shifting target, and he is not. So 1 star, and we move on. Next, we have Prince Charming, Heir to the Throne, 3/3 for 4, inkable, quest for 3. Same thing as the Hans that we have in Emerald right now. That is seeing some play, actually. But I'm hoping that these type of cards are going to get phased out with Rise of Floodborn. We're getting more cards in the card pool, better options. But I have to respect that this equivalent card is getting played right now. So I am going to give it a 3-star rating, because I think that it's time for these types of cards to fade out. It's just not enough. You need some effect. Next up, we have Rabbit, the Reluctant Host, a 4/6 for 5, inkable, quest for 2. He's competing with the 5-drop Maleficent, that's 3/6 for 5 and quest for 3. The extra pip of lore is just better, and as the card pool grows, we're looking for more characters with ability. So I'm going to give him a 2-star rating, because if you're playing on a budget, he's actually fine because of his raw stats, and he's a decent replacement for that 5-drop Maleficent. But other than that, there are better options out there. Enters the legendary Divine Water Dragon, Sisu. Looking pretty awesome right there. He's 2/4 for 4, non-inkable, quest for 2. With the ability, whenever you quest, look at the top 2 cards of your deck and put 1 in your hand and the other 1 on the bottom. Now you're talking. A repeatable card draw engine that allows you to pick cards. So first off, his stats are okay for a 4-drop. I prefer 5 willpower to have more chances of keeping him alive, but that's okay. His ability is really good. I mean, you get 1 quest for him, you still get the 2 lore, and you get to pick a card to replace him. He has that 2 power to fight back a little bit, and 4 willpower can be enough to keep him alive depending on the board state. And if you get to activate his ability a second time, then you're in a very good spot. I really like Sisu. I don't think he's groundbreaking, but he's definitely going to be included in a few copies in a lot of Sapphire decks. So I'm going to give him a 4-star rating. Just a very solid, versatile, playable card. Next we have the Knock Water Spirit, a 4-drop inkable, quests for 1, 4/3 stats, nothing to speak about except the picture. It's a nice card in foil with the Aurora Borealis in the background and the ice sculpture, but it's a 1-star card, so keep it in binder, keep it safe, and keep it hidden from your decks because we don't really want it there. Here we have Winnie the Pooh, Having a Think. 2/3 for 3 inkable, quest for 2. So it's another one of these slightly weaker stats line. How good's the ability? Whenever he quests, you may put a card from your hand into your inkwell face down. So it doesn't need to be inkable to begin with, and you can ink it, which is a nice upside. So what does this compete with? Well, it competes with the 4-drop Bell that has better stats and doesn't need to quest to have that ability, although you can't put the uninkables into the inkwell. So I prefer Bell significantly to Winnie the Pooh for multi-inking during 1 turn. As a 3-drop, Winnie also competes with Mickey Mouse Detective, which just enters the battlefield, bam, put that card from the top of your deck, not even your hand, into the ink pool. Which, even though he doesn't have that second pip of lore and only 1 power, Mickey Mouse Detective feels a lot stronger than Winnie the Pooh. So, this card is kind of stuck between rock and a hard place, and it's squeezed between cards that exist that have similar abilities. Maybe you can play a couple of copies as flex spots if you don't have your Mickey Mouse and you're looking for a 3-drop play and you really want that ramp and you're stuck with some uninkables in your hand. Maybe it can help you in that bind, but outside of that, it feels like there are better options, so I'm going to give him a 2-star rating. Sorry, Winnie. Keep thinking, and maybe that'll improve your skills. Next we have Falling Down the Rabbit Hole. Each player chooses one of their characters, puts them in their inkwell face down and exerted. Not a song, you must pay the 4, and that card is not inkable, so you're committing to paying 4 to play that card. Is it good? Well, it's symmetrical removal, but you choose the timing. So if you can manage to create a board state where you've eliminated most of your opponent's characters and they have 1 character left, and you have a little weakling or damaged character, you can play Falling Down a Rabbit Hole and boom, you've just had a very advantageous removal spell. If you don't have a character and the opponent has one, boom, advantageous removal spell. So it's actually a pretty decent card. I think it's worth an inclusion if you're playing a control-ish type strategy, either with some weak characters that you don't mind sacrificing, and Sapphire has a lot of those, like Mickey Mouse Detective. It also helps you to ramp a little faster. So if your opponent's playing a somewhat aggressive strategy, maybe one of these emerald builds so they don't flood the board, but they keep on playing these somewhat big threats, well, you can sacrifice one of your weaker characters that's already done its job, take out a threat, and ramp yourself up so that you reach your late game threats faster. Lots of nice applications. It feels like if you build your deck knowing that you're playing some copies of this, you can always gain a good advantage out of it. So I'm going to give a 4-star rating to Falling Down the Rabbit Hole. We have 4 Dozen Eggs. An action song costs 4, and it gives all your characters resist 2 until the start of your next turn. That's interesting. Feels like an upgrade to Hakuna Matata. Resist 2 can be useful if you're about to go to war and just have a bunch of combats, preventing the 2 damage on all of your characters for the turn can be pretty good. Also, you're protected from counter challenges. So if you have characters with Challenger, for example, you can use that to kind of make them immune or significantly reduce the damage during your turn and prevent the opponent from having a nice swing back. But overall, this is very situational. You need to be in that perfect situation when you're about to go to mass combat and you need to resist 2 to matter and you need it to impede your opponent on the next turn. But this is a song, so songs always get a little uptick, but I still don't think it's great. I'm going to give it a 2-star rating because I think it's just too situational. And an upgrade to Hakuna Matata, well, really it's not that great. Here we have a launch. A 3-drop action, non-inkable, that says banish an item of yours to deal 5 damage to a character of your choice. So this is an undercosted removal spell, which is very good by design. So you can take out a lot of stuff with 5 damage. Pretty much anything that's a 5-drop or less. Maybe even bigger drops depending on what they are. And all it costs you is 3 ink, which is very, very cheap in Lorcana, and an item. Okay, so you're 2 for 1ing yourself, which is a downside, but it allows you to punch above your weight in terms of removal because it's a 3-drop action. And these types of cards in other card games, like in Magic, there's these types of removal: sacrifice a character, destroy another character. These are generally quite decent played, and especially since actions, you're playing a bunch of 1-drop actions. Some of those even replace themselves like popsicles. And launch is perfect to launch a popsicle at your opponent's character face, give them a brain freeze, and take them out. Apparently brain freezes are deadly in Lorcana. So launch is a very solid card if you're playing enough items to support it. And I will give it a 4-star rating, even though I'm fighting with myself, because I just always dislike 2 for 1ing myself. But in this case, it is going to be worth it. It is worth the inclusion, and I will have to battle myself and put some launches in my deck. And yeah, 4-star rating. Let me know if you agree or disagree. Next, we have Nothing to Hide, a 1-drop inkable action. Very simple. Look at your opponent's hand and draw a card. Simple, effective. It's essentially a cantrip. So you can use it to essentially thin your deck if you want to. Because by paying 1 ink, you're increasing the odds of drawing the other cards in your deck. And we're starting to have quite a bit of these action type cards. The main use for them is to actually just trigger action-based triggers. When you play 2 actions during your turn, get this bonus. For each action you play during your turn, get this bonus. It's a cheap way to get these triggers because it replaces itself, costs you 1 ink, and it's just great for that. Also, Nothing to Hide has the added benefit that peeking into your opponent's hand allows you to play around some cards. Like, does your opponent have a Be Prepared? Does your opponent have a Rafiki that's just ready to ram into your characters? Grab your swords. Whole New World, do you need to dump your hand because your opponent's about to make you drop your hand anyways? So having that information is still somewhat valuable and allows you to make better decisions about what you're going to play. And that's just a side effect. You're really playing this just to stack actions, get some triggers very cheaply, thin your deck, and it's just great at what it does. And I'm going to give it a 4-star rating. It's just a solid card. You might even be playing it just as a turn 1. Look at what's in your opponent's hand to make better gameplay decisions later on. Even though you don't have any other kind of synergy, gives you a bit more deck consistency. It's inkable if you don't want it. It's a solid card. Next, we have Fang Crossbow, an item for 3 inkable with the main ability Stay Back. Banish this item, banish a dragon character. Now, if we ever play with sideboards, as a sideboard card against decks that are playing multiple dragons, that's actually pretty good. Because it's a clean 3-drop inkable removal spell that just goes boom, you're out, Mr. or Mrs. Dragon. And you also get the benefit of having another ability. You can pay 2 and give a character -2 combat power for the turn. Yeah, that I don't like. We have that ability on Maximus right now and one of the Auroras, and it's not as good as it looks. And that's on a big beater for a similar ink cost. So as a reusable source on an item where you're investing the full 3 ink to put into play and the full card, and then you need to pay an extra 2 to activate this. That's asking a lot. So I don't think that the Careful Aim is overly good. As a sideboard against dragon, pretty decent. But we don't have enough dragons in play to make this valuable so far. And, well, if your opponent is playing Maleficence, it doesn't really matter. You've most likely lost the game. So I'm going to give this card a 2-star rating, because its main use is to get rid of the stuff that your opponent's playing when your opponent has already won the game. Next we have Gumbo Pot. Best I've ever tasted. Remove 1 damage from each of up to 2 characters, and you can activate that once per turn. It's kind of like a Diggle Hopper or Coconut Basket, which we don't really see because, well, the effect's not great. Now we do have a healing tribal deck where the Gumbo Pot can be useful, and it's inkable, it's an item, provides a bit of healing. So if you're playing an items based deck, you can consider playing it as one of copy maybe. It's not great, honestly. I'm going to give it a 2-star rating, mostly because of synergies with healing tribal deck, where you get bonuses every time you heal a character, and you get to heal 2 off of a very cheap item. So it's playable in these decks. Outside of that, not really. Next we have Maurice's Workshop. Whenever you play an item, you may pay 1 ink to draw a card. The ability is decent, but this is a 3-drop non-inkable item. So the fact that it's an item means that you can trigger other item synergies, which is nice. But it's a mid-range price item. Doesn't do anything when it enters the battlefield, doesn't apply any pressure to the opponent. It's just going to power up your engine. And I'd rather have cards that power up my engine that do a bit more. Because Maurice's Workshop is going to cost you your turn 3. And then, well, to get the bonus out of it, you're going to have to pay a tax every time, which is going to end up costing you. So you don't want to play too many Maurice's Workshop in your deck. Maybe you're playing it as a 1, maybe 2 copies in your items tribal deck, or maybe 0, because you don't really want to be that vulnerable to an aggressive strategy. If you do get to stick it around and the opponent's not pressuring you, then you can get a lot of cards out of it. But I feel like this is a bit like a Musketeer's Tabard, where it looks great. You're kind of looking and saying, oh, I can draw a lot of cards off of this. But the tempo swings that you're giving to the opponent are sometimes lethal, and you'll never reach that point of 1,000 cards in your hand where you've decked out. But the effect is cool. I'm going to give it a 2-star rating. I think it's not worth the tempo to play this card. Next up, we have the Popsicle, a 1-drop inkable item. When you play it, you draw a card, and you can also banish it to remove 2 damage from a character that you own. This card is the best item that we have for Item Tribal's deck. It's super cheap, it replaces itself, and you can cash it in for a decent ability. And you can cash it for nothing. So you can actually just remove 0 damage. It says up to 2, but 0 is a number up to 2. So you can just send it to the discard pile if you like to activate other kinds of triggers. It's very nice to sacrifice. It's nice to launch it at the opponent's character's face and give them brain freezes. Overall, yeah, it's just the best item for Item Tribal decks. And it deserves a 4-star rating. Highly playable. Even as a cantrip type of item, it's alright. I'd consider including that just in normal Sapphire deck as an early turn 1 drop. You replace it, draw another card, thin your deck, and you have that little healing potential later on in the game. I really like this card. And the last item in the Sapphire is Sardine Can. It's a 4-drop inkable item that gives you Flight Cabin. Your exerted characters gain ward. Now, ward is a very strong keyword, and ward is a strong keyword because it's very difficult for an opponent to take out an unexerted warded character. They can't challenge it, they can't target it, they can't play actions to remove them unless they're mass removal cards. Sardine Can gives wards to characters that are vulnerable to combat because they're exerted, which really doesn't have the same impact as an unexerted warded character. And most players are playing decks with characters because characters can quest. And so the opponent is still going to have ways to deal with your characters. And that ward is going to, that ward is not even going to nullify all of the opponent's actions because you can't play all your characters exerted out of the gate. You're going to have to play some of them unexerted, and that's what the opponent's going to target with their spells, which is probably what they would want to do anyways. Target your exerted characters with combat, target your ready characters with actions. So what is Sardine Can doing, really? Well, it's costing you 4 ink to put into play, and then sitting pretty as an item. Okay, it's still a nice effect, but you're sacrificing a lot of tempo to just play a do-nothing item on turn 4. Duplicates are useless because double ward is just as good as single ward. And if you get triple ward, well, you get an award for deck building, I guess. So, I don't like Sardine Can. I really like ward, but not on my exerted characters. So I'm going to give this card a 2-star rating with the benefit of the doubt. Just wards are just so strong. Maybe if you play like a pure bodyguard deck and suddenly all your characters are always exerted, and with a Sardine Can you've just completely blanked all the actions and all the effects from the opponent's deck, then maybe there's some cool potential deck. But outside of that, characters are still vulnerable to challenge, and Sardine Can just paper thin metal, doesn't protect you. I hope that you've enjoyed this video featuring a bunch of animals and talking clocks, as well as new ramp spells, new draw spells, and everything else Sapphire. Let me know in the comments below what is your favorite Sapphire cards in cards in Rise of the Floodborn. I hope that you've had a great time. So if you did, don't forget to subscribe to the channel to make sure you don't miss out on any of the future set reviews and gameplay videos. There's going to be a bunch of deck lists coming soon with gameplay, with tier lists that'll let you tell me that I'm wrong with my rankings. And then I'll say, I think I'm right. And then you'll say, I think you're wrong. And we're going to have a great chat about it, and it's going to be fun, and it doesn't matter who's right, which you can also do about the set review. But for now, let me know what is your favorite Sapphire card from the set. Hit the like button, and enjoy the rest of your day, as I'm really hoping that I'll see you in the next video.